So this week we have Steve Pinckney. He is our speaker for this episode, and today we're going to talk about mastering IT projects and the human side of change. Steve, thank you so much for taking time out your busy schedule to join us.
No, thanks for having me.
Let's start off. Yeah, absolutely. Let's start the conversation with learning more about your background. How did you get into this? How did you get into IT change management?
IT change management, those are two big questions actually. In the IT and the change. I've always been a one of those computer nerds, computer geeks. So I've been in and around computers for pretty much as long as I can remember. But before I did change management, I was a implementation consultant and project manager in the financial services technology industry. So I used to go around and implement a system called Charles River Development in what's called the buy-side investment banks and what have you. And so I did that for a number of years. I was based out of London, where I lived for nearly 5 years. And I consider to this day, I still consider that second home. I go there every few years and check in, so to speak. But yeah, from there, I've been on projects around the world, leading technical implementations or implementing the application or what have you. But again, that was a number of years ago. Before that, I was a Marine Corps, active duty Marine in the United States Marine Corps. And I was fortunate to be able to, work with technology in the Marine Corps. As a matter of fact, I was a database administrator as well as a computer programmer. And that's really kind of where I, developed my chops, if you will, for technology in terms of, how technology can be used to further enable, an organization's mission and whatnot. So the group I was part of was very reliant on technology. So, and now, I'm a organizational change management consultant. I'm also a team coach. That's where I am today.
Cool. Well, let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. So when you think about your classic IT implementation, it doesn't all happen in one time. It happens in phases.
Right.
Kind of walk us through the typical framework and what we should expect in each phase.
Okay. So I'm a disciple of PMI, if you will. So I'm a PMP certified project manager.
Absolutely.
So I kind of I'm beholden to their phases, if you will. That's kind of how I approach projects as well. And there's 5 basic phases. There's initiating, which is where, I'll go through all 5 and I'll come back. So there's initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and then closing. So in initiating, that's where you're basically, if we were using a house metaphor, that's kind of where you would go and start getting the paperwork together in terms of, how are we going to buy this house? What loan are we going to get, et cetera, and start looking at interest rates and whatnot. And so in the IT project space, what we're doing is we're, doing things like the project charter. Why are we doing this project? Gathering enough information to build a business case for that project, and sort of almost getting some of the political will together to get this moving forward. Planning is the next step, of course, which is, okay, we decided we're going to do this. So what's it going to take to actually do this? What kind of resources do we need? When do we want to start this? Maybe start picking some of your staff members in terms of project managers, who's going to sponsor this, et cetera. How long do we think this project's going to go for? Is it a 3-month thing, or is it a 5-year type plan? So start some of the early planning. And then, of course, come up with your project schedule to the extent that you can at that phase. And I say that because, a lot of project management is based on what we call progressive elaboration. So the more you know, then you can start, modifying your plans as you go along and as you learn more. Next is executing. And of course, that's where, the rubber hits the road. It's where we start doing the work. If that's building the application, writing the code, doing analysis, everything it's going to take to actually move that plan and that project forward. Monitoring and controlling. I actually don't really think of that as a phase. I think of that as an activity that a project manager does, where basically he or she is looking to see, how the project is running, how it's executing, and what areas, if any, need to be addressed or improved or, changed or what have you. So if there's not a scope management process in place, or if the scope management plan is not being followed, for example, then, tweaking that plan, making sure everyone's aware of that. And improving that. So whatever it takes to, make sure that the project, or the train, so to speak, stays on, on the rails, on tracks. Then there's closing. So once, once it's done, then, all the formal handovers, everything from getting the customer or the sponsor to sign off that yes, this project has indeed delivered the benefits that we're hoping to handing it over to whoever the run support or run organization or support teams are, handing over any documentation and what have you. So those are the 5 phases as I see them.
Yeah. So in the initiation phase, a lot of things, a lot of organizations lack structure in the initiation phase. What are some of the best practices? Because in IT, oftentimes the projects, they run late. Oftentimes you may have your resourcing strategy may change. Right? You may bring on a number of external contractors. You may have some people chime in from the business part-time. What are some of those best practices when you're first launching a technology implementation?
Well, there's that's a great question, actually. There's I think a Chinese phrase that says, beginnings are delicate times, basically. And I really take that to heart when it comes to projects because, how you start off has a lot of impact on where you're going to end up. And aspects of starting a project is leadership alignment. I see too often that, projects get kicked off and you have, some sort of, some variations of buy-in across the board. Some are fully invested and fully committed. Some are, sort of half-heartedly committed and we'll go along with it, and everything in between. And I think that that's really unfortunate because when you're executing a project, especially a large global deployment or transformation initiative, you really need everyone on board, rowing in the same direction, committed, etc. And so I think one of the best practices is having a workshop, if it's a one-day workshop, a one-week workshop, whatever it is, depending on the type of engagement we're talking about, to make sure that everyone understands why we're doing this, everyone agrees that it needs to be done, and how it needs to be done, and the details in terms of what the actual solution is, et cetera, can come a little later, but really just making sure that the collective will is there. And I think without that, there's a great chance, or a terrible chance, I should say, that the initiative won't be successful. And God forbid you'll have to roll it back or cancel it halfway through, for example.
Yeah. And then oftentimes with technology implementations, you may have end user groups who currently manage a process manually, perhaps even in a spreadsheet, right? And then with this new technology, they now have to work within an automated workflow or automated process.
Right.
How do you approach culture? Not the big macro culture of an organization, but the culture within the project, shifting, mindsets within a project. What's your recommendation for that?
Okay. My one primary principle in that space is something I call the platinum rule. So we know the golden rule, which is do unto others as they would have you, as you would have them do unto you. The platinum rule.
I like that.
Yeah. The platinum rule is the opposite. Do unto others as they would have you do unto them. In other words, anytime, you're trying to figure out how we should engage someone or if this is going to work for this group, et cetera, don't assume, don't think that you know the most or the best, unless, of course, you work in that space in that particular role. But go to the people, go talk to them, share with them some of your plans and your ideas and your assumptions and check them. Because they're the ones, they're the ones who are closest to the coalface. They know what it really takes in order to get their particular function done. So by assuming that what's done, what needs to be done, and not checking with the people and whatnot, then you run the risk of delivering something that's not fit for purpose. And again, that may not hit the mark, may not deliver the benefits. And you think about all the sometimes millions of dollars that are spent and laid out over the course of a year, 2 years, sometimes 5 years on these initiatives. That could be a really disastrous outcome.
Yeah. We all know that change management is critical, especially in terms of when you're dealing with technology implementations. In your experience, how have organizations articulated the value of change management towards technology? How do you know how to price that budget?
Okay. Oh.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, few things. Probably the biggest thing when I train, I hear a lot of people when they talk about the value of it, they go right into the benefits and the with them, what's in it for me. Here's where we're going to deliver this. It's going to be great. It's going to help you do your job faster, et cetera. And that's all fine and good. One of the things that I train my change managers on, and anyone that's even playing the role of a change manager, is that the primary purpose of change management isn't just posters and making people feel good about change, et cetera. It is accelerating ROI. Our primary function is to make sure that when we go live, when the organization goes live, that the people who are going to be using the system, and I talk about systems a lot because, again, my background's in IT technology, but when we go live, people are prepared for it. They understand why it's been rolled out, and they understand how it's going to impact them, so that, again, when we flip the switch, they can get back to those pre-go live levels of productivity as soon as possible. And the sooner that we can get people back to those pre-go live levels of productivity, because, again, once we start these initiatives, there is some disruption. We are asking people to take some time out of their schedule and away from work to do things like train or, help with requirements gathering, et cetera. And so the sooner we can get people back to pre-go live levels of productivity, the sooner the organization can begin realizing their ROI. And that's what I always train people on. Our goal and our role as change managers is to accelerate the return on investment for organizations.
No, that's actually a great explanation. Now, can you share your perspective on getting an organization to that particular state where they can go to higher levels of productivity? How is it more so using the change agent network, or is there another recommended approach that you would recommend?
Okay. First, again, my approach and the approach I train people in is start with relationships. Like everything these days, relationships are key. And in particular, there's two relationships I'm interested in. There's the relationships that the project team has with the stakeholders. And I say that because a lot of times IT project teams, like a lot of IT people sometimes, myself formerly included, we think about the technology and we go away in our little cubicles and our caves and whatnot, and we focus on that without thinking about the end user, who's actually going to be using the software. And I know Agile has been introduced and is starting to become in vogue here, at least down here in Houston especially. I'm supposed to address a little bit of that, but I still see there's still there's the core team that the Agile teams are made up of, but there's still the larger, massive end users as well. So I always encourage my team to get out, talk to them. And whenever I organize impact assessments, I try to make sure that our team members are there to observe as well. Or if not possible, have them actually run the change impact assessment themselves. So that's one relationship that I think is of critical importance, the relationship between the project team and the stakeholders. The other is, and it sounds kind of strange, but the relationship of the stakeholders to the project itself. And I say that because, a lot of times we forget about the history of these efforts. Sometimes we're running on a project and we think it's a great idea. It's the best thing. It's going to save so many dollars and so many minutes of time or hours of time. But we forget about the history of this. We tried this before last year or 5 years ago, and even though it may be, it may not be something that the newest, group of consultants who are coming in are aware of, it's still fresh in the minds of the stakeholders. So when we say we're going to come and do this, that, and et cetera, they're thinking, what about last time when we tried this and it didn't work? So I want to know, what is the relationship, in the minds of the stakeholder community that we're impacting? What's their relationship to this effort that we're trying to accomplish? And that's important because if it's something that we've tried before and it didn't go so well, then we need to address that. We need to explain to them, if they don't already know, why it didn't go so well last time, what we're doing differently, and why we feel it's important to do this again, and why we're going to do it now, basically. So relationships is the first thing. And then, of course, resources, making sure that we have the right resources in place to affect this transformation or this rollout or whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish. And again, that's where, the leadership alignment aspect comes in, is very critical, that I talked about earlier, because, without the proper alignment, then you may not get the right resources that you need to deliver this initiative. And then, of course, the initiative can, sort of, choke and sputter, and we don't want that, of course. Is the roles that we're going to be asking people to play, both on the project team, but also, just as importantly, and maybe even more so importantly, the roles of the stakeholders. As we deliver, especially these newer technologies, and you use the example of going from a spreadsheet to an IT system. Well, roles would be different, and the way those roles are conducted would be different. Instead of working in a
Yeah.
silo, for example, we may need to work more across the board with each other, more tighter
Yeah.
integration, tighter collaboration. So we're going to be asking
Yeah.
people to stretch a little, change their role a little, think a little differently about how they perform their task, et cetera. So
Absolutely.
those three things there: relationships, resources, and roles together. I believe play a combined role in
Yes.
delivering a situation where you can hope to accelerate ROI.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. So, Steve, you actually wrote a book for change management practitioners who are really not familiar with IT projects. I love that book because I think I've experienced my first IT project in maybe 2010, and I wish I had your book. I wish I had your book. I was stuck Googling, looking for information that just wasn't there, and really struggling through that. Can you tell the community, why you wrote the book, and what are some core elements that we can pull away from that content?
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of funny. The book, I originally wrote the book for college students and people who are brand new to the IT space. I found myself mentoring quite a few people who were joining a consultancy and found themselves on a Monday morning on a project and didn't really understand what was going on. And of course, no one takes the time to explain that to them because we don't have time anymore. And so, so I always pulled people into a room and, did some whiteboarding and walked them through what we're trying to accomplish, et cetera. And every time I did that, I always wished that I had some sort of resource I could hand to them and say, here, read this. It'll get you sort of 80% of the way there. And, at the very least, you'll understand what the various roles are when they introduce themselves to you, at the next meeting. And you'll understand, at a high level, and actually at somewhat deeper levels now, what we're doing here and what we mean by the term IT project and what we're trying to accomplish. So that's why I wrote the book initially. But I also identify, or after I published the book, I kind of found out there's two other groups that are using it. One you mentioned, which is a change manager, because I kind of took for granted that anyone that works on IT projects, including change managers, have a deep understanding of technology. But that is not necessarily the case, and doesn't have to be the case either. But I found that several change managers have read this and have appreciated the perspective that it gives of technology. And then the other audience that is for now is for the business user who finds themselves being dragged kicking and screaming into IT projects through the whole move to Agile. Because as you know, with Agile, we're supposed to be involving business with the IT projects and having them play more of a role in terms of looking at the backlog, et cetera. And so, this book will help them understand, what is it that we're after? When a business analyst comes to them and asks them for certain questions, they understand why, that business analyst is asking those questions and what the business analyst is, trying to attempt. So those are, kind of three, audiences for the book. And in terms of, some nuggets from the book that you asked about, I talk about, I guess, three core things. One, what do we mean by the term IT project? You can understand each of those words or phrases independently. IT, we kind of understand what that means. Project, we more or less understands what that means. But together, what does that really mean? What is it that we're actually trying to build or enable and whatnot? And so I go into that in the book. And then I also talk about the teams on a typical IT project, everything from the project manager, the business analyst, the change manager, and I think even the subject matter expert. And, what do we mean by those terms? And for each of those roles, I talk about, what is that role responsible for? What is their approach to doing their task? And then what are some of the common challenges they face in doing their job? And then finally, but not last, I'm a former database administrator, and just about most of these technology projects have at their core a relational database of some sort, one sort or another. Yeah. And so I talked a little bit about what we mean by relational database, and I even give an example of, how we create relational databases and what those relationships look like and the importance of them. And and I believe that's important because because of the way relational databases are structured and because they drive so much of the technology, they drive some of the actions that we have to do on projects and the actions that we're asking some of our stakeholders to do. So things like clean up this data and scrub this data and remove duplicates, et cetera. A lot of that's to do because, the relational database doesn't, can't handle or, we don't want to put duplicate data in the database. So I go into a little bit of detail about what we mean by relational database as well. And so collectively, and, I wrote this book because I didn't see anything on the market like it. But I wrote the book just to give someone a holistic picture of, what we mean by an IT project, what they may experience, and some tips and bits that they need to know to help them succeed on their projects. And I'm very humbled, because I'm getting some of the feedback that I was hoping to get at when I wrote the book. Looking at some of the reviews and emails I'm getting back. Yourself, for example, you said you wish you had the book when you were starting out, and I've heard that.
Yeah.
So I'm very, very honored to be getting that. Yes.
Steve, the biggest takeaway for me when reading your book was understanding your perspective on roles and responsibilities. Because oftentimes when I'm supporting a technology initiative, it's one against 100 or 200 that may be happening in the organization. And so just having a perspective on clear roles and responsibilities allows me to enter a conversation in a certain way, right? And kind of minimize confusion and also help facilitate the right conversations with groups of people. So that was the biggest takeaway for me.
Awesome.
We have a member in the community that I'll transition in, Josh Madden. Let's see. Josh, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah,
Josh.
We can hear you.
All right. Hey, Steve. So I'm the one I ended up purchasing your book.
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much.
And so I'm about halfway through it here, and I mean, for any of the folks that are out there on the call, like if you're even thinking about it, it's definitely a good read. It's a fast read. I like your style. I like how you break it down and make it really simple to digest. So I know, like, I'm a person that I come from the Lean Six background and in the change world, and so the way you're able to break down the IT lingo, I appreciate. And so,
terrific.
I want to give you kudos for that. And then I kind of had a question, like, what other resources similar to your book would you suggest for those of us that are novices in the IT world to start checking out?
Well, it's obviously nothing like my book, so no, I'm kidding. I'll be perfectly honest with you. When I was, whenever I used to need to, get some starter information, I used to start with the dummies books, and because I got to admit, I'm a fan of the plain language, plain spoken way of explaining things, and I also like humor as well. So the dummies books, that line is pretty good, and I like also because it's so comprehensive. I mean, they cover, I think, every topic, in that publisher. But then again, it also then depends on, the nature of what I'm looking to learn about. So if I'm looking, from a very technical perspective, like in terms of, writing code or what have you, I was a big fan of the O'Reilly book, lines of book, especially when it comes to Oracle as well, and .NET and whatnot, because I think they have a really good way of covering a lot of information in a very deep way, but somehow it's accessible. And they also have like a line of books called, like they call recipes books, like the Perl recipe book, for example. And they gave code samples of how to do things and whatnot. So I like I said, I like, plain language, I like humor, but I also like real world applications. So if you can show me, some real world code or some actual code that's used to solve a problem, I'm a big fan of that. Trying to think of another book from an IT perspective. Drawing a bit of a blank, to be honest with you. I know they're out there, but I'll tell you, if some come to mind, what I'll do is I'll put them out there in a ChangeNerd community. I think Brian will probably post this, at some point next day or so. And so I'll put, some thoughts. If I come up with some other ideas for books, I'll put some thoughts underneath the video post. That sound good, Josh?
Yeah, great. Appreciate it, Steve. Thanks.
And thank you very much for your feedback. It's very, very helpful to hear that. I'm very glad to hear that you're getting value from it and that you're finding it useful as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, Steve, what is your what's the big takeaway? We have some members on the call, and I'll post this video into the ChangeNerd community. But for someone who is now supporting an IT initiative, what's the one thing that you want them to take away from your book or this conversation, or just one strong nugget that would help them?
Can I do two?
Yeah. No problem. No problem.
All right, so from an IT, perspective, I suppose, always, and from the developer on up to, the project manager, the sponsor, always have a relentless focus on delivering stakeholder value. In other words, yes, you can, we have all these technologies and these tools that can do all sorts of cool stuff now and whatnot, but is it really going to deliver value for the end user or the stakeholder? Make that be, and strive for it to always be your constant, true north. When you have to decide, make any decision whatsoever in terms of feature set or budget, what have you, what do we need to do to make sure that we deliver value for the stakeholder? Because I think we tend to get away from that with all of our, thoughts about methodology and code base, and is it cloud or on-prem, or is it agile or waterfall, or whatever. What's going to deliver the most value to our stakeholders? And then secondly, from, putting my change manager hat on, to what I alluded to earlier, which was, or not alluded to, but said earlier, accelerating ROI. Our primary focus and our primary, our raison d'etre, if you will, as change managers, is to accelerate ROI. Nothing else. I mean, we have several tactics that we use to do that, but we're not here, like I said, to make people happy. We're not here to, make pretty PowerPoints or pretty posters or what have you, even though that might be some of our skill sets. But we do all of that, to accelerate ROI. So everything we do should be strategic in nature, and it should move people, 1, 2, or 3 steps along the change curve with each activity that we perform. So those are my 2 takeaways.
Awesome. No, it means the world. I think that type of advice needs to be delivered more often. So that's all we have today. Everyone on the call, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And Steve, I know you're a busy man. We value your time. Thank you for having this conversation with us today as well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.